Welcome to tonight's edition of the Sunday Night Sit Down. We have another very engaging conversation with a local leader about issues affecting folks all over the greater Pittsburgh area. And today is no different. We will be joined by City Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess, talking about some new initiatives happening in Pittsburgh City Council that you may have seen in the news very recently. So we're very, very excited to bring Reverend Burgess on. Welcome to the Sunday Night Sit Down, Reverend Burgess.
Just great to be here.
Absolutely. Always good to see you, my neighbor, my North Point Breeze neighbor. Always good to see you, whether in real life or in the virtual world. So I wanted to bring you on today to talk about some of the new initiatives that have been in the news this week here in the city of Pittsburgh. First, a piece of legislation that you spearheaded around increasing health, wellness, and safety within the city of Pittsburgh. Can you talk a little bit about what that's about and what's the potential timeline for passage?
The Healthy and Safe Pittsburgh Initiative is going to be implemented by the City County's Office of Public Engagement to strengthen the health, safety, and well-being of citizens in communities. You see, we've sort of changed council and changed our priorities. Instead of just paying police, we're now investing in people. Instead of just funding companies, we are investing in citizens. Instead of just paying city employees, we're going to invest in community-based organizations. And we've been doing that in various ways. And this is the latest way. We've done this by expanding the Summer Youth Employment Program. We did this by establishing the Housing Opportunity Fund for families. And we did this by recently the Stop the Violence Initiative Fund that will fund directly community-based nonprofits. But this is to provide technical assistance and increased capacity to citizens, small business, and to community and faith-based organizations. We have hired 5 full-time people to engage in this effort, to go into the communities underneath the determinants of health, to begin to build more resilience, to increase affordable housing, to increase more out-of-time programs for education for our kids, to increase the access to health and health advocacy and health literacy. And so we are excited. Is in council now, but we hope it will be approved very quickly. The workers are already on board and will start going into communities, meeting with residents and community-based organizations to strengthen them, to write grants, to help them access resources, and to strengthen their all-around programming.
Thank you for that. So, what was the impetus to make you take, this on, as one of the folks who's really spearheading this within the council?
It really was COVID, right? After COVID, we lost so many businesses, and we found out that many of our organizations were very, very fragile, right? They didn't have the resources. In some ways, they didn't have the capacity to get stronger. And so, we need football teams for our kids. We need after-school programs for our kids, but there's really no one on the ground making sure that those programs are available to our young people. There's really no one on the ground helping people start small businesses. We've lost maybe 34% of Black businesses in COVID, and there's no one replenishing that pipeline. And so I believe it's time for the city to invest directly to citizens, directly into the community, directly into small businesses. And so that's what it was really the aftermath of COVID, where, we were disproportionately affected by COVID. We lost more people, disproportionately. We lost more businesses. We lost more income. We lost more jobs. And so we have to make the city more. And so, Khari, what I also want to do is make sure that health is built into everything we do. So the city has to look from a health perspective of how this is going to advance the health and well-being of Black people and poor people in the city of Pittsburgh. When we make an investment, how is this investment going to wind up impacting poor communities, Black communities, and make them healthier and more resilient and stronger.
Thank you for that. And how has this proposal been received so far amongst your colleagues on council?
I think pretty good. I'll have multiple co-sponsors. Certainly, the president, Daniel Lavelle, the finance chair, several others are excited by this new initiative. It really is, I believe, extraordinarily significant that we start taking the resources of the city and investing them directly in the communities and the citizens who need these resources.
In some of the reading that I did, I saw that some of the ideas around this legislation came from some of the proposals that were made in the transition plan from the folks that sat, on the transition team. What were you able to pull from those recommendations that team sent to Mayor Gainey?
Yes, this comes actually directly from the transition team. They said that they believe that public safety has to be transformed to have a health component. They also said we have to look at the social determinants of health. That is, all of those factors in a community that make it unhealthy: housing, food insecurity, lack of employment, lack of infrastructure. And I think they were exactly right. They called for a legislative agenda, a legislative agenda, and so I've taken that call very seriously. And in some part, at least from my little perspective, this is a way of implementing those recommendations made from that transition team.
Thank you. And so far, have you been able to interact with the mayor's office on these proposals? Have you gotten any indication of where they are on?
Yeah, my understanding is that they're supportive. They'll be supportive, and we are actually working with their outreach workers to make sure there's no duplication of services. Because with the mayor's office, in terms of his community outreach team, they tend to put out fires. Right? There's a crisis, they come out. But these, in my mind, our public engagement workers are really more building infrastructure, creating community meetings, helping day in, day out. They're not really designed just to go when there's a problem, but really to sit in these communities and build the strength and the resilience of our communities where our weaknesses may be.
Okay, and what do you see as the timeline of when this will, fully launch?
Well, I'm thinking the next few weeks, actually, to be honest with you. I think we can't wait to be healthier, right? We can't wait. One of the things I tell people, if you go to the corner of Penn Avenue and Fifth Avenue, not too far from where we live, right? If you go to the one block, it is Larmer. Cattle Corner, it's South Point Breeze. Well, the standard of living and the longevity of expected life are probably 15 years from that one corner. If you cross over one corner, your life expectancy is 15 years longer. They have one of the longest life expectancy in the county. And then if you live in Larmer, you have one of the shortest life expectancies in the county. Well, that shouldn't be. And the reason it is because one has amenities, one has access to capital, one has businesses, jobs, food, all the resources they need. The other one is struggling. And so we have to invest in the communities that need resources and provide them with the capacity to be stronger and more resilient.
Okay, and for those out there who are watching or who may have been following this in the media, how can they find out more about this program, and then how can they potentially, partner or be engaged, with this community engagement program?
Well, they can certainly call my office always, 412-255-2137. But we are in the midst of planning a series of community meetings to bring these public engagement specialists right to the heart of the community and introduce them, provide people with access to them. So what we found out is, to be honest with you, Khari, if like a person who wants to start a new business, they're really, even the places that supposedly provide technical assistance, that technical assistance is too advanced for a person that's just starting off and has a good idea. Right? So they really don't have they need pre-technical assistance. They need someone to sit down and explain to them how to come up with a business plan or what capital means. And now we have that, and now we have people in the city who have the time and expertise to do this. Many of our nonprofit organizations, they do good work, but they can't write grants, right? That's a whole different capacity. And right now they have to either go find it or hire somebody. But now we have full-time workers that have that capacity to assist our community-based organizations in writing grants or getting higher capacity. I'm really, as I told you, as I've been on council, and as you know, I've fought very hard to bring resources and housing resources and economic resources and the avenues of hope into Black communities. I also think we need to specifically and intentionally invest in Black people, Black families, and Black communities. And it's not just Black, not them, but we want to help the whole city. But since Black people are disproportionately doing worse, then we should start off with them. And so these engagements, workers are not just for Black people, they're for the whole city, but certainly for those areas that have been left behind, that needs even greater.
Thank you for that. With that in mind, and the disproportionate, negative outcomes we see, in our traditional, African American communities, do you see this new proposal as a way to, not only kind of counteract, the kind of historic barriers that have been created, but also, be a solution to addressing, what has really become a recent, challenge here in the city of Pittsburgh, whereas, in many areas, we didn't see a lot of development and growth, but even in areas that haven't had a lot of growth, like, where we live, we're seeing a lot, of a development. Do you also see this as a way to keep the development, from being, kind of an occupying force that some people have made that, that assertion? Do you see this will help as the city continues to grow and develop, which it has? I mean, I've, been driving around the city a lot more recently than I have in the past couple of years with the pandemic. And I've been shocked to see all the development that has gone on during the pandemic. So do you see this as also a solution to help stem the tide of how potentially somehow some of the development is, putting people outside the city into neighboring communities?
Well, I think if you think about the priority, if our priority is to make our current residents and communities healthier, safer, then we're going to do things that are going to strengthen the communities as they already exist, provide safety in communities they already exist. That the philosophy is to make these communities safer and healthier, then we're going to target the existing population. Now, if we're trying to, the word is gentrify, of course, but if we're trying to gentrify, gentrification does not make stronger communities because it doesn't make stronger citizens. It actually makes weaker citizens because it displaces the existing citizens that are already there. In my mind, and I've talked about this at length off air, you have to have what's called, the real goal is mixed income housing. When I say affordable housing, I think everyone should have clean, decent, affordable housing at whatever income you have. And so, back in the day when I grew up in Homewood in the 50s and 60s, I'm showing my age, in the early 70s, if you're a Black doctor, Black dentist, you lived in Homewood. If you're a Black accountant, you lived in Homewood. And there were higher price houses, there were medium class houses, and there was, those houses that were, lower income, but they're all clean, decent. We all played together. But now in many of our Black communities, the only thing you have left is, unfortunately, poor neighborhoods and poor housing options. We need to replace that with a variety of housing options so that if you are a professional, you have an opportunity to buy a home that keep its value. If you're a working class person, you can have a house that you can rent or own. That's what I think. I think we have to be very intentional. And let me be also clear, but we must start with building affordable low-income housing first. Because if you don't build it first, when the market does come, it will displace the people. So you want to start first with building housing for the people who are there, and then over time, start bringing in different housing models for the people you want to bring in.
And just one last, question, along the lines of this, office of public engagement. I understand that staff is staff being brought on, or staff has already been brought on.
They're already hired. They're already
Okay.
at the city. They've already been trained. They're now ready. I intend to have. I may have said this earlier, but at least for my community, every council person has access to them. They represent all council. But for my council district, in the next, you'll hear about it in the next few weeks. I'm going to have a series of community meetings throughout my district, introducing them to people in their community, so that, because every community is different, right? So I'm going to give each of my communities access to them in a direct way, so they can see what services they offer and how they can be utilized best in those individual communities.
Okay. And before we jump to some other city issues, I did want to just briefly jump into the intersection of politics and government. I know that recently there was a redistricting, of city council. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how some of the districts may change, or how your district may have changed due to the census, and obviously every 10 years you're mandated by law to change the districts to reflect population trends over the last 10 years?
Well, as you know, we've lost a significant number of African Americans in the city over the last 10 years. And I represent the largest group of African Americans. Therefore, I had one of the largest amounts of exodus from my district. And so what happens is there is an advisory committee. Each member of council picks a person to represent the advisory committee. They do their due diligence, and then they send the council a recommendation, a map of a recommendation. And then council amends that map as it sees fit and approves a final map. That final map for us has been approved. In terms of my district, I've grown. I did not lose any of the precincts that I've had, but what I've gained almost primarily was Point Breeze, South Point Breeze. I now have the lion's share, almost every precinct except one in South Point Breeze. And so that would be South, right? I've gotten bigger in South. And so, and I'm less, my district is less minority. Before, it was probably in the 70s. Now it's somewhere in the 60s.
Okay. And has there been any major changes throughout the city? Any other major points in the redistricting process to point out?
I think Bobby Wilson has a strip district now. And I think there have been minor tweaks. I think I had the largest sort of change. Now, the caveat to that is whether or not Wilkinsburg comes in, right? And Wilkinsburg, if it comes in, could come in as early as January 2024.
Wow.
If Wilkinsburg became part of the city in 2024, we would have to instantly redistrict again.
Okay.
We'd have to, you can't have taxation without representation. And right. So since they are primarily adjacent to my district, we've kind of looked at it. Either one of two things will happen. Either all of Wilkinsburg will be put in the 9th Council District, which would mean probably 50% of the district would be Wilkinsburg. So it'd be changed to probably Wilkinsburg, Homewood. It would go probably East Liberty to Wilkinsburg, probably, no Point Breeze at all, probably something like that. Either that, or they would split Wilkinsburg and probably 60% of it would be put in my district, and 40% of it would be put in the district formerly occupied by Corey O'Connor. Those are pretty much the two options, but it would shift everything west. All of the districts would change because you're bringing in 15,000 new voters.
Right. And you said there's 30,000 people per
council
district. So it's almost adding.
Yeah, it's about 30,000 per council district.
Right. And that's extremely interesting. Now you bring that up. Now we know earlier in the year and parts of last year, this was an issue, and there was advocates in Wilkinsburg that were against it, but obviously there was advocates that were for it and almost came very close to getting it on the ballot. But obviously you were very instrumental. I think if I can quoting you correctly, you called it a shotgun wedding. If we would have went ahead, in 2021 going into 2022. What do you think has changed since then? Why you think it might be more viable? Not saying that you're for or against it, but why do you think it may be more realistic now and it wasn't so realistic maybe 12 months ago?
I think first was time. I think that no one had done any of the due diligence to really sit down and say, okay, if this happens, what will be the impact on the city of Pittsburgh? What will be the impact of Wilkinsburg? What's going to happen to the school district? What's going to happen with the kids? What's going to happen with for instance, the busing situation changes dramatically for the school board. What happens to the water authority? What happens to the authorities? How does this merger affect them? What happens to I think it's the Penn Wilkinsburg Water Authority? What happens to that? None of those questions were discussed at all. There was no conversation about, okay, well, where would they go? Would they go all in my council district? Would they go 60% in my council district? What would happen to taxes? None of that happened. It was sort of and then the other thing was, there was some conversation to the Wilkinsburg residents about whether they wanted to come. There was no conversation with the residents of the city of Pittsburgh to say if we want them. And so it just wasn't, I don't think it was fair. I thought it was rushed. And I thought a year's time gave every party a chance to present the case. But I will say this, the truth of it is something has to happen structurally different for Wilkinsburg to survive. If left up to its own devices, it will be structurally bankrupt in the next few years. It just does not have enough resources to pay for its ongoing support. And so whether it's merging, whether it's takeover by the state, whether it's, tripling property taxes, they're going to have to do something significantly different to stay viable.
Interesting. And just one last question along this line. Now that you mention it, now I know there may be also some potential, like entity level questions with the city of Pittsburgh, because I know the city of Pittsburgh is now as close to going south of 300,000 than it's ever has been since maybe almost 100 years ago. And I know Pittsburgh is the only city of the second class, or I think it's the only city of the second class. I know Philadelphia is a city of the first class.
Yes.
It's also a county as well. And there was a question that Pittsburgh may lose that second class city status if it fell south of 300,000. I think Michael Lamb and some other people who were in support of the merger or the annexation, depending on your point of view, were saying that it was important to band together with the 15,000 residents of Wilkinsburg to ensure that the city of Pittsburgh doesn't fall south of 300,000 to maintain the city of the second class status with state government.
That part's true. The other part is that we get money, our CDBG money and some of our grant money comes from the federal government directly dependent on our population. And so if we lose population, we will at the same time lose CDBG money, we'll lose resources coming into the city as a whole. And, we're a little over 300,000 people. Wilkinsburg is very small for us. It's just another neighborhood as far as the city is concerned. And we have the bandwidth. We already take their garbage. We already provide their fire. We already educate their kids. We don't do the grade school kids. We do the middle school and high school kids. The other thing is, and this is just simple mathematics, their property taxes are so high, it's almost impossible for many of their housing units to be rehabbed. It's just structurally impossible. But if they came in the city of Pittsburgh overnight, their property taxes would be reduced in half. And many of those houses, their value would go up 30, 40, 50% almost overnight. And so they would be eligible for home loans. It would just change their real estate market almost overnight and give the city, even without the URA's intervention, the market forces would come back and be helpful to revitalize Wilkinsburg.
Right. That's very interesting. So that's something that we'll continue to monitor very closely along the issue of housing. Staying with that theme in our last few minutes, wanted to talk about the homelessness issue in the city. This is another issue that you're tackling on city council, and it's an issue that I've been hearing about more. I think I think we've been, kind of lucky in our neighborhood, in our side of town. Like I'll admit, I haven't seen, this phenomenon the same way as many people around the city have been talking about it in different, parts of the neighborhood. Can you talk about, how we got here and, what is the state of the homelessness crisis in the city and what is city council doing to address it?
Well, there are multiple stressors of homelessness. Certainly, COVID-19 has exacerbated a problem that was already there, right? The lack of affordable housing also is a contributor to homelessness. So is drug abuse, so is mental illness, right? There are a lot of contributing factors. The interesting part, and this is sort of a sidebar, in terms of places like Homewood, they have a homeless population, but you don't see them because they're homeless, but they're living in someone's living room on the couch. They're in a car somewhere. They're in a abandoned house. There are structures that they can hide in. So you don't see them with tents in parks in the inner city because they're typically hiding. They have extended family members. And so even though they're technically homeless, you just don't see them on the street. In other communities where they don't have the extended families or they don't have the abandoned buildings, then you're seeing them tents and then in corners. But it all comes down to, Khari, the lack of really transitional housing and the lack of affordable housing in the pipeline for the residents of our city. It really comes down to that. And I will say this over and over again, and to whoever will listen, and I said this under the previous administration, and I'll say that to Mayor Gainey, who I support. The only real way to really begin to deal with this problem in any structural way is for to put more money on the table for the construction of new housing units, the construction of new transitional housing unit and temporary units. And the only way to put new money on the street is for the city to take out a bond of somewhere between $60 and $100 million to jumpstart housing and affordable housing, including temporary housing for the homeless in the city of Pittsburgh.
And I saw your colleague, Deborah Gross, was mentioned in the article. You were also mentioned in an article as well as looking at some city-owned properties.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that process is and the steps are being taken?
Believe it or not, and this is one of the frustrating things, right? We have all of these city-owned properties that could be rehabbed or used for a variety of things, including housing for the homeless. But again, we do not have the funding streams to rehab these units. And so what we're trying to do is come in collaboration with the county, with the housing authority, with all the available entities to do housing, to see how we can jumpstart providing housing to not just the homeless, of course, but to those other families that are struggling, with affordable housing. And again, I think the real answer is to put more money on the table so that we can build more units.
And I feel like in past years that would be, considered kind of controversial. I feel like in the past, many taxpayers and many citizens wouldn't be for, those kinds of investments. What do you think has changed as far as how the public's feeling about homelessness, and why it seems like folks are willing to be more creative when it comes to addressing it, as opposed to just, locking them up or just, putting them somewhere where they can't see them. Wow, it seems like there's just more creativity and more humanity, coming from Grant Street than we've seen in recent years or even in past years.
Well, I think a couple things. I think what you see is a mature council. We are arguably, in terms of the year spent, one of the most mature councils in the history of our city. The second thing I think you've seen, and I like to think I've been a part of this, is a belief that we must directly use the city resources to invest in individual citizens, individual families, and community-based organizations. Before, a lot of that was left up to the county or left up to the state, or the city would say that wasn't our interest. Where now you have a council who's willing to say, no, if there's homeless in the city of Pittsburgh, it's our responsibility. If there's kids that aren't educated, that's our responsibility. It's not just the school boards, it's also the city's responsibility. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it, to be honest with you, is the success of our city. Before, you had really three kind of groups of people. You had those who were doing pretty well, a strong middle class, and then you had, people who are on the poor end. But what you're seeing now is that middle class is evaporating in Pittsburgh. So you're having these people who are doing very, very well, and then the rest of us who are struggling. And so I think what you're seeing now is this realization that could be me. The homeless is not just people, who are down on their luck, that we can never be me, that many of us are 2 or 3 paychecks, right, away from that being us. And so I also think the attitudes have changed because there are more people struggling in the city of Pittsburgh. A greater percentage of our population is actually struggling.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And before we go, can you remind folks one more time how to get in touch with your office to find more about the solutions to addressing the homelessness crisis in the city, as well as to contact the new Office of Community Engagement, or to find out more about your proposal to address health, safety, and wellness?
There's 2 ways. First of all, certainly feel free to call us at the office, 412-255-2137. Email me at reverend.burgess@pittsburgh.pa.gov. That's reverend.burgess@pittsburghpa.gov. It's really important. I believe that we need to really, and I believe, Khari, I know that you're about this too. We have to now go child to child, family to family, house to house, and rebuild the resiliency of our communities in our city. COVID has devastated us. And so we have to have all hands on, put all available resources in the community to strengthen us, because there will be another issue. It may not be a pandemic. I don't know what it will be, but there'll be other stressors. And this is the time to make our city, our residents, our community-based organizations, our citizens healthier and stronger.
Well, thank you so much. Reverend Ricky Burgess, Pittsburgh City Councilman, representing District 9 in the eastern part of the city of Pittsburgh, giving us a lot of powerful information about new initiatives to City Council, as well as a potential merger between Wilkinsburgh and Pittsburgh somewhere in the next couple of years. Thank you so much for joining the Sunday Night Sit Down. We look forward to being in touch with you as these proposals and initiatives come to pass and get launched in the city. So stay tuned. Please contact his office or your council member's office to find more about these initiatives. But thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck.
Thank you, man. Be blessed. Glad you had me. I enjoyed myself.
Yeah, no, it was great to have you. Thank you so much. And again, Reverend Ricky Burgess, Pittsburgh City Councilman, District 9. Thank you so much to Reverend Burgess for joining us and giving us a lot of really timely information about very new initiatives happening on Grant Street. We are going to be watching those very, very, very closely. And thank you all for joining us on the Sunday Night Sit Down. Once again, we will be back next Sunday at 7 p.m. With another influential leader in the Pittsburgh community that's either working in government, working in activism, doing something, changing the lives of Pittsburghers on a daily basis. And also never forget, Monday nights at 7 is the Power Hour. That is not going to change. And, we're going to be starting our fall programming on Monday, September 12th, where we're going to continue our summer series, meeting with local organizations and activists in the Pittsburgh area, finding out all the wonderful things they're doing. So on behalf of my colleague, Miracle Jones, who couldn't join us tonight, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next Sunday on the Sunday Night Sit Down, or we'll see you tomorrow night at the Power Hour, Mondays at 7. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good night.